So we should probably talk about what it is I'm holding right now. We've just learned a lot of info about the Xbox Series S and Series X the past couple days, and Microsoft gave me the awesome opportunity of checking out these faux units. These are the physical designs of the Series S and Series X exactly as they will be. They just happen to be hollow. So the first thing that really came to mind for me when receiving these units is I want to actually see how they compare in person size-wise to other systems. And I gotta say, both of these, when I first opened them, look way smaller than I expected. I think, especially because of the kind of proportions and dimensions we're working with now, especially with the Series X, they tend to look very large. But really, in the wild, these are pretty trim. First, let's take a look at the Series X. Now, the main kind of comparison that a lot of people have kind of drawn before is that, as you can see here with an Xbox One X, it's roughly the same height, just a hair taller. And it's not nearly as deep while being considerably wider. This ends up giving it a very different footprint where it's a square base and looks really nice in tower mode, which is definitely the intended style because the power button Xbox logo is oriented that way. And this ends up making it a really nice tower setup that, if you have the entertainment center for it, looks really nice. Now, this does also support landscape mode. You actually have little feet right here for when you lay it down. This ends up being as wide as an Xbox One X, but obviously the big trade-off here is it is considerably taller. This can make it possibly a little awkward for certain setups if you're used to having it sideways and you like having compact design and there's not a lot of height to it. It does primarily vent off of the sides in that situation. There's no vents on this side of it, so there's no air being pushed up. It's all sideways and back. So if you were planning on having this set up horizontally, that's really something you want to be aware of, is where the air is being pushed out. Now, the Xbox Series S, on the other hand, is tiny, really tiny. This is actually a lot smaller than I imagined it was going to be. Like the Series S, design-wise, it's opted for a pure kind of almost box approach. It doesn't have the little base setup that the Xbox One S and One X have. Instead, it's just the simple box design. But unlike the Series X, this is definitely meant to be set up in a horizontal fashion because of the fact that, well, again, that Xbox logo is telling you which way it wants to be. Now, obviously, one of the running jokes right now with this system is that when it's in tower mode, it looks like a speaker or maybe an intercom to order some Taco Bell and have it delivered to you while you're playing. And not gonna lie, that's exactly what it looks like, no matter what. That's just what it is. But in horizontal setup, it really just looks like a more traditional system, something very similar to the Xbox One S. It is a little thicker as far as the kind of main white body goes, but with the added Xbox One base, they're pretty much the same thickness. And it is, of course, just a little bit shorter and not nearly as deep. Horizontally, though, is definitely the way that this system looks its best. While the fan vent on the top looks a little silly in tower mode and leads to all the memes, when it's set down sideways, there's almost a little bit of a DJ setup, I admit, but it just ends up looking a lot more minimalist and doesn't draw nearly as much attention to that and just looks a lot cleaner. And like Microsoft has been saying, this is the smallest Xbox that has ever been made, not just for the next-gen systems, but in general out of any Xbox console. Now, while these are hollow dummy units, something worth noting is that both of these do also show us the ports on the back of the systems, which we have seen some images of in the past. On the back of the Series X, we have a pair of USB-A ports. There is also a single port on the front of the system. Beneath that is the Ethernet port, and below that is the power. Beside those, we also have the expansion port where you can plug in their proprietary memory cards if you want to add more storage, and beneath that is the HDMI. Meanwhile, on the back of the Series S, we have actually the exact same number of ports and everything, though they are laid out differently. It's more like the current gen systems where they're just all lined up across it, where you've got the Ethernet, a pair of USB-A, HDMI, that SSD expansion port, and of course the power, with a single USB-A port on the front. As far as personal preference goes for just how the systems look, I gotta say, I love the way the Series S looks. Again, I don't think tower mode is really its strength, but I've always been a fan of keeping systems horizontally, and this looks great that way. The Series X is also cool. I think it definitely works better in tower mode. Horizontal orientation does look a little bit weird because it is so much taller than other systems in that setup, but this still ends up being a pretty nicely compact design while in tower mode. Definitely smaller than what we're seeing for the upcoming PS5, which I'm very curious to do some in-person comparisons of because that thing looks huge. As far as the visuals of these systems go versus the PS5, definitely a matter of personal preference, and my opinion might even change once I see the PS5 in person because we still only have images to go off of, and stuff just always looks different once you get your hands on it. But definitely the overall goal for Xbox has been to go for much simpler systems that are kind of really just a further evolution of what they did with the Xbox One S and One X, while PlayStation just went full crazy town with a very unique looking design. As a recap for what exactly these two systems have to offer, the Xbox Series X is the high-end, more expensive option, is the one that we have known for longer. It's running for $500, and it's going to get you 4K gameplay with the additional promise of 8K in some situations, with up to 120 FPS. And of course is also able to accept physical discs, while also rocking a 1TB SSD. On the other hand, with the Series S, you are saving $200, coming in at a price point of $300, making it most likely the most affordable next-gen system. We don't know prices for PS5 yet, but I really don't think either of them is going to get as low as $300. The drawbacks, of course, are that it is an all-digital system. You cannot use physical discs at all. It comes with a 512GB SSD instead of 1TB, and while it uses very similar internal parts with the same CPU and a smaller version of the graphics card, it is a weaker system that targets 1440p and 1080p gameplay rather than 4K, though 4K upscaling is also an option. While these systems do have their differences in performance, keep in mind that these are meant to be the same generation system. They are offering the same library of games and should be offering the same kind of visual and performance for titles, including frame rate. The only big difference is, again, what maximum resolution each one is going to offer you. The Xbox Series X has certainly been the main focus for a while over the past year as we have learned more and more about this system, and as far as performance goes, it looks like this should be the most powerful system of next generation. There is some debate with how we'll actually see games perform on this versus a PS5, but as far as just raw power and specs go, this looks to be the strongest system of next gen, costing you $500. And while that's cool and all, honestly, I actually think as far as the holiday season goes, the Series S is really the system people are going to be looking out for, because especially considering how the last year has been, the idea of saving $200 to play the exact same games is really, really good and tempting. Obviously, the big trade-off here is you're not going to be able to use physical discs, but Microsoft has been really pushing Xbox Game Pass as a great way to play a lot of different games with that monthly fee, so that's making all digital look a lot more appealing than usual. Add on to that the fact that Microsoft has now been also pushing Xbox All Access, where you just pay a single monthly fee that covers both purchasing the system and getting access to Game Pass Ultimate. This is a really good way to get access to the Xbox ecosystem, and I think more than anything makes it a much more tempting offer for people who are either not sure what next-gen system they want to get, or if you're tempted to go the route of getting both systems, this is a much easier add-on to grab alongside a PS5 than the Series X is. Really, I think the bigger trade-off to pay attention to with the all-digital isn't that it's an all-digital system, but that it has that smaller SSD at 512GB rather than a full terabyte, because especially if you're only getting games digitally, that is going to fill up over time, especially depending on what kind of games you play. Anything that's an open world type of game is going to fill this up pretty quick. And as we know, the only way that you can add extra storage that'll be able to play next generation games is to make use of proprietary expansion memory cards that Xbox is going to be making. We don't have an official price point on those just yet, though there have been some rumors circulating, and depending on the price of those expansions, it might end up canceling out the value saving of grabbing this, unless you really only plan on buying a handful of games, or you're totally cool with deleting stuff to make room whenever necessary. One way to help counterbalance that a little bit to keep in mind is that if you like having a library of Xbox One games, you can run those off of a traditional external SSD. It does not have to be the proprietary for that situation. So for your older library of titles that you want to use on a current system, you don't have to necessarily rely on the internal storage, though they will load up slower as a result. So that's been my experience with these units, and comparing them to current gen Xbox, I was really surprised by the actual size of these in person. They really come across smaller than I was expecting them to be in photos. Again, a lot of this comes down to personal preference, but I love the way the Series S works. I'm still going to use an X probably, because 4K gameplay and, you know, doing videos, all that fun stuff, but this is awesome. This is brilliant, but I love this.